Elena stooped to pick up the USP as Julian slid down the glass, trembling and whispering a name she could not meet. Suspicion tightened her hands around the drive before she even looked at the label. The corridor light hummed. Elena's pulse organized itself into short, practical decisions. Get the evidence, steady the man, leave no trace. She moved with the brisk economy she used every morning to iron his cufflinks and lay out his calls. Julian's suit was rumpled at the shoulder where it had caught the door frame. He breathed shallowly, palms flat against the corridor glass. Not meeting her eyes, Elena, he said once, as if testing whether her name still arrived clean. Her thumb found the crescent scar above his left eyebrow and noted the tremor in his jaw. Elena's mouth stayed closed. She placed the USP into her leather portfolio and folded the crumpled memo into a neat square with 2 fingers. She had seen men lose composure before. Suspicion had first sharpened in her as a careful instrument. Why here? Why now? The memo was stamped with a department initial and an internal project code she recognized. It named a contract clause that, if revealed, would expose a decision Julian had personally approved. Elena felt suspicion harden into urgency. That urgency directed her hands. She guided Julian to the small executive washroom by the service entrance. The sink was stainless and bright against marble. Elena turned the tap and held the paper towel for him. He accepted it with a nod that trembled. You shouldn't be here, she said, not as a reprimand but as a factual statement. Julian's voice was low, I know. I made a mistake. Elena kept her own voice even. She picked up the memo and the USP from the counter and slid both into the inner pocket of her portfolio. No one else in the building had her access or her habit of carrying a slim drive for encrypted schedules. She did not ask Julian why. She placed a hand on his forearm to measure whether he would bolt or follow. He stayed. Outside the CO suit, glass walls reflected the city lights in fractured strips. Elena had been with Julian for 8 years. She remembered the way he preferred his papers arranged by risk category and the exact tilt of the blinds he requested before quarterly calls. Those facts were work to her. They were not trust. Tonight she felt a new calculation sharpen. Protect the company, protect the man who relied on her, and keep the ledger of what she knew to herself. That decision was practical. It had nothing to do with loyalty. Elena walked out of the washroom with the portfolio pressed to her side. She moved through the reception area with controlled steps so the security cameras would register a routine check. She returned to Julian's office, slid the door closed behind her, and sat across from him at the glossy table. He watched her with a face that had learned to be unreadable in public. Now the control had dropped away in small motions. The twitch at his wrist, the blink that came too often. What is it? Julian? He kept his voice low. Elena set the portfolio between them and placed the USP on top as if it were merely another object on a long list. You dropped this, she said. Her sentence contained no accusation. It contained the fact she could prove. Julian swallowed. He had always measured his replies. Project Harlow, he said finally. It was supposed to be redacted. An external vendor. Things moved up the chain. I didn't anticipate this memo. He looked at her for the first time, eyes gray and exhausted. Elena watched the way his jaw tightened and then relaxed. Her suspicion shifted to a new, narrower motion. Doubt about whether he had misjudged risk or had been outmaneuvered. She laid out 2 moves. First, hide the physical evidence. Second, buy time. Elena spoke in small sentences, each a step in a sequence rather than an order. Leave it with me tonight. I will handle the access logs. Don't sign anything. Wait until morning. Julian's silence filled the space between instruction and acceptance. He nodded once. She closed her portfolio and touched the slim engraved locket inside the inner pocket to remind herself there were personal stakes too. The next morning Clara Voss called Elena into her private office. Elena arrived with the memo still folded and her watch pressed beneath her sleeve. Clara's desk smelled faintly of bergamot and old papered. Elena. Clara, tapping a pen, tell me exactly where you were last night. Her voice was measured and exact. Elena answered with precise sentences. The washroom, the corridor, the USP, Julian. She did not provide useless detail. Clara tilted her head. No one reported this yet. Why did security not flag a disturbance? Elena named the time she had checked logs. Every answer was a small counterweight. Clara's eyes sharpened. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her questions were the shape of pressure. Elena felt the second root of emotion take hold, fear. Not the broad panic of it, but a contained fear. If Clara suspected concealment, Elena's job could be the cost. The two women measured one another across the leather top. Elena, Clara, after a long pause, "We have obligations to the board." "I need to know what you kept and why." Elena described her actions with the clarity of habit. Gathered evidence, moved the files, limited exposure. She did not say she had done it to spare the company a public crisis. She did not say she had done it because Julian could not face ruin. Each omitted phrase was a deliberate choice that protected more than one person. Clara's lips pressed. She pushed the agenda slightly across the desk and dimmed the lamp. "We cannot pretend we done to smell trouble. Naomi flagged anomalous access this morning. Marcus wants to sweep the servers. If there is an unauthorized copy, it must be found." Clara the names as if they were chess pieces and not human beings. Elena felt the pressure increase. Fear moved into a new register, calculation plus exposure. At the hub, Naomi Chen was already at her station. Naomi was frank and quick with numbers. There was a red from a secure node at 2:01 a.m., Naomi announced. She did not look up from the screen. Account used Julian's profile with a proxy from an internal server. Elena watched Naomi's fingers tap and pull logs. A file named Harlow draft. Ink was moved. It didn't export, but someone copied metadata. Naomi's tone carried the concrete fact. They had a trail. Marcus Lee from security arrived with a brisk, practical posture. He Elena to stand beside him at the bank of monitors. Marcus spoke in commands that expected action. "Elena, who else has access to archives?" he asked. Elena named teams, vendors, and privileged accounts the way she would read a list of appointments. Marcus' face tightened. He issued immediate containment orders, freeze accounts, physically secure Julian's office. No one leaves without sign-off. Elena felt the parameters of her choice narrow. She could explain or she could risk exposure. They moved through the building in a controlled rush. Elena ducked into the server corridor on Marcus' clearance. The corridor smelled of cool metal and circulated air. Marcus supervised while Naomi ran checks with her tablet. Elena's hands were steady. She knew server racks by their labels, and the moments when a humming fan meant a node still served a live process. Elena chose a rack that held archived snapshots and slipped a solitary encrypted copy onto a drive she carried in her portfolio. She did it with clean motions and without spectacle. Marcus watched the swap over her shoulder. "You re-sure of this?" he asked. Elena answered with a quick list of facts about access times and node ownership. Marcus's face held both suspicion and a grudging recognition of her skill. He ordered the entry logged as a supervised maintenance task. Naomi marked the record. External event. Naomi's tablet pinged an alert and the head of legal strode toward them. The day folded into a taut set of briefings. Clara convened a quick meeting in the glass boardroom and called Julian into it by phone. The boardroom smelled of coffee and polished wood. Julian sounded steady for the first minutes, reading prepared lines. Clara let him speak. She listened without interruption. Elena sat at the end of the table with the portfolio on her lap and the hidden drive behind her watch band. She watched the way Julian folded and refolded a handkerchief when he thought. She watched Clara tilt her head slightly and silence the room with a single raised finger. Clara's voice cut. "We cannot sanction a public leak. If there is a copy, we need it contained now." Julian explained the Harlow draft. Julian named the external vendor and blamed an accelerated timeline. He used sentences that sounded like governance. Elena felt the next emotional shift, doubt toward clarity. What had sounded like a single failure now had edges that suggested someone else might have moved the file. Elena listened for a cadence she knew. The sets of words Julian used when he was protecting a decision rather than reporting an error. The conversation became direct in 3 quick exchanges. Julian, who authorized the clause. Clara, Julian, did the legal team sign off? Julian, who accessed the vendor logs. Julian answered each time with measured phrases. The room's rapid back, and fourth lasted fewer than 5 minutes but changed the shape of how Elena would act. She had the leverage, and she had to decide whether to reveal it here. When she spoke, Elena kept her voice low. "Clara, Marcus, Naomi," she said, watching each face in turn. "The missing file is not missing. I have control of an encrypted copy, and I can give it to legal under supervised conditions, or I can hand everything over to the board. But I will not let an external contractor dictate our public statement." Elena's sentence landed like a pivot. The boardroom did not erupt, it contracted. Julian's chin tightened. Clara's eyes sharpened. Clara leaned forward. "Elena, you understand the risk you take by withholding this." Elena answered with an inventory of steps taken. Isolated copy, supervised transfer to legal, marked chain of custody. She did not say she had done it because she believed Julian's mistake could become a cascade that would cost employees their jobs. She let the fact that she controlled the copy speak for motive. Julian's voice stripped of pretense. "Elena, give it to me." Now, he looked directly at her for the first time that day. Elena measured his stance. Not a public plea, but a command shaped like a demand for preservation. Her hands tightened on the portfolio. "Julian," she said, "I am offering terms to contain this. I will not be the only one to choose the phrasing that goes to shareholders." The room held its breath in the manner of a meeting that expected a resolution. Clara's reply was pointed. "Elena, loyalty is necessary, but the board must not be blind to risk. What do you want as oversight?" Elena listed conditions in short sentences. Legal custody, a closed session to frame the internal statement, limits on vendor contact, Marcus to log all searches, Naomi to certify the forensic sweep. Each term landed as a practical safeguard. The room negotiated. Julian offered to cede control to legal if Elena would allow an immediate transfer. Elena felt the climax approaching. She would either return the copy and lose leverage, or she would set the board's terms and hold the company hostage to process rather than scandal. The negotiation tightened with 3 rapid exchanges between Clara and Julian. "You hand it over now." "Julian." "Clara, no. Clara, we need to frame this to avoid panic." Julian answered. "Elena can supervise the handover," Clara proposed. Elena watched them trade short lines like surgeons exchanging tools. She felt the emotion shift one last time, from fear and suspicion to a calm decision born from competence. Elena placed the portfolio on the boardroom table and opened it. She produced the USP and slid it toward Clara. "Legal custody first," she said. "Marcus, Naomi, stay in the room." "Julian, you will not release a statement until counsel signs off." Clara nodded and extended a slim leather folder for the chain of custody documents. Julian's jaw worked. He did not speak. Elena filled out the custody form with quick, precise handwriting and watched Clara sign. The physical act of writing anchored the agreement. The meeting ended with terse, formal language. The boardroom dispersed. Elena left with the portfolio closed but lighter in a way that did not diminish the weight of what she had done. Julian walked past her in the corridor and paused. He looked at her, then at the portfolio. He did not thank her. He did not ask her if she had feared the cost. He only said, "Elena." She met his gaze and nodded once. Outside the elevator bank, the city light sank behind reflective glass. The company stabilized for the moment. Agendas were reset. Elena felt the aftertaste of her choice. She had acted to reroute a crisis, and in doing so she had declared herself a central node in a system that had previously treated her as background labor. That declaration had consequences. She knew someone would test it. Back at her desk after hours, Elena sat with the portfolio open and no one else in the suite. She took out the small engraved locket she carried under her watch band and laid it on the leather desktop. Her fingers moved over the metal. The locket was personal, not professional. It reminded her of a quiet promise she had made to herself years earlier. To hold practical truths for the people who could not be seen in the quarterly reports. She closed her eyes for one slow count and then opened them to the dim window. At the doorway, a faint red lead caught her eye. She turned and saw a camera lens tucked into the ceiling facing her desk. The lens's tiny light winked as if it had finished a loop. Elena's spine tightened into attention. She reached toward the desk to pick up the locket and, with the same precise motions she used in meetings, slid it back into the inner pocket of her portfolio. The final scene was concrete. She clipped the portfolio shut, checked the log on her tablet to confirm the forensic handover had been recorded, and pocketed her badge as if preparing to leave. The chapter closed on a single practical sound, the tap of her badge at the elevator sensor, and the red lead's steady pulse as it returned to active sweep. That sound was not a metaphor. It was a new fact someone was watching. Elena left the suit with her posture unchanged. She held the certainty that she had shifted power by an afternoon's decisions and the knowledge that those shifts invited scrutiny she could not yet name. Emotion root. Suspicion shaped Elena's first moves, fear directed her negotiations, and resolve carried her through the boardroom. Two emotion shifts threaded the chapter. Suspicion to fear to calculated resolve, and doubt to clarity to guarded authority. The events followed a clear arc. Discovery, concealment, interrogation, containment, a risky maneuver in the server corridor, public negotiation, and a quiet aftermath punctuated by the surveillance sign. Each choice she made was visible in her actions, tucking the USP, steadying Julian, writing the chain of custody, slipping the locket back into her pocket, rather than explained through abstract feeling. By the end of the night, the immediate crisis had been contained, but Elena understood she had stepped into a different role. She had moved from invisible labor to visible leverage. The board trusted her competence, Clara measured her as a potential steward, and Julian knew he owed a debt he could not name. Elena closed the portfolio one last time and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button, and the doors slid shut with a soft mechanical sigh that sounded like an agreement. The elevator descended. The red LED at her desk blinked once more before the feed went dark. The chapter ends with Elena's portfolio under her arm, the locket against her ribs, and the recorded handover waiting in the legal folder. A concrete chain linking what she had done to what would be demanded of her next. Nothing magical happened. A report had been written. Signatures had been made. The surveillance feed's tiny light, still visible in memory, promised that the containment had not erased the risk. The last image is practical and precise. Elena's hand on the elevator rail as the car moved down, her watch catching one slice of city light, and a message on her phone titled, "Board, follow up," arriving as the doors closed. Elena slammed a corrected financial folder onto the glass table, and the numbers landed like an accusation. Suspicion tightened her hands around the edge of the folder as 3 sets of eyes tracked the paper. "Clara, explain this, Elena." Julian did not look at the sheet. He froze with his knuckles white around a pen. Within the first 3 sentences, the boardroom registered the problem. The official audit did not match the source figures she held. That mismatch was a public risk and a private wound for Julian Rhodes. She had not planned this confrontation. Elena had come to the late-night meeting with a stack of invoices and reconciled spreadsheets expecting minor edits. Instead, she carried a complete, corrected folder she found while reconciling accounts with the night finance team. The night auditor had flagged a set of entries. Elena traced them back to a file stored under Julian's private account. Her hands had sorted evidence, her voice would be precise. The clash started as action, not rhetoric. "Clara, Julian," voice low, "we can walk this back." His face held the practiced calm of a man who kept control by narrowing choices. Elena watched the skin at his jaw shift when he said it. That micro-movement seeded doubt across the table. Clara pushed her glasses up and tapped the folder. "Walk it back into what, Julian?" Into silence, into lies. She named the stakes in a single sentence. Elena felt a shift. Suspicion became calculation. She had learned to turn unease into procedures. She pulled a photocopy of the source file free and slid it under the lamp. The lamp's pool of light made the numbers sharp. These entries were moved the week of the merger. Elena, the totals were reduced by $9.4 million. Her voice did not tremble. The boardroom did. Clara leaned forward. "Julian, you put your personal account into corporate ledgers." Julian's hand folded and refolded a white handkerchief. He avoided names. Elena kept her attention on the paper and on him. The thought of exposing the source file grew heavier as Julian's refusal shifted into something else. Avoidance that smelled like fear. Elena had seen fear in Julian before. In the corridor weeks earlier, he had slid down the glass wall and whispered a name she could not meet while she bent to pick up a USB drive. She still remembered the drive's thumbprint of fingerprints and that small moment where a man who commanded rooms had become suddenly small. That memory pushed her now. It changed the weight of what she held. The USB had been the first concrete clue. The corrected folder was the second. Julian. Clara again, voice flat. You owe us an explanation we can print. She called for counsel without raising a hand. Amira Solis entered 10 minutes later with a leather portfolio and a legal stare that made the room colder. The external event, a counsel's arrival, shifted the conversation into legal terrain. Julian looked at Amira and then at Elena. Fetch the original file from my office, he said. The instruction was a pivot. He did not say please. He hit his containment. Bring it now, Elena. No copies. The demand handed a private task to the woman who had discovered the discrepancy and placed immediate control in her hands. Elena felt the second shift. Calculation hardened into constraint. She stood, closed the folder, and walked out of the room with measured steps. The glass door clicked shut behind her. At the end of the corridor, her heels made steady, neutral sounds on polished stone. She had the set of keys Julian had entrusted her with months ago. She needed one key more than access. Calm. Julian's office smelled of cedar and bergamot. Elena moved without hesitation, methodically checking the desk and the shelves. She paused only at the private safe built into the credenza. The safe was unlocked. Julian preferred openness in small things. Inside she found a locked drawer. She used a slim key she always carried. The drawer resisted, then yielded. Inside lay a small stack of personal papers. A typed internal memo, a folded letter, and a locket engraved with initials that matched Julian's. The memo mentioned a covered debt and a transfer that did not appear in public accounting. The letter read like a private plea, 15 lines that asked for discretion while admitting a risky personal loan used to cover a failed venture. Elena read 3 lines aloud to herself before closing the paper. The room held evidence now, and evidence altered choices. A knock sounded at the door. Elena slid the documents into her leather portfolio and replaced the locket where it had been. The knock was Julian's voice at the threshold. He stepped in with the night's fatigue carved into his cheekbones. You shouldn't be where you are, he said without anger, with something sharper. A measured warning. She did not look surprised. You for the file, Elena. Her words were small and deliberate. He closed the door behind him, and the space between them took on a different gravity. He steadied himself on the edge of the desk. The control in his posture flickered, as if trying to find footing. Elena watched him for the micro expressions she had catalogued over years. The small scar above his lip tensing when he felt guilt, the way he folded and refolded a handkerchief when containing emotion, the slight narrowing of the steel, grey eyes when planning cover. She set the portfolio on the desk between them. This memo links the transfers to a private account, she said. Someone moved funds to cover a personal shortfall. Her sentence left the rest to inference. Julian's voice went very low. You shouldn't have opened that drawer. His hands moved toward the portfolio and stopped. He did not reach. His pause was an offer. In that pause, Elena felt a third emotional turn, from constraint into bargaining. She met the offer with a decision she had practiced in private for nights she hadn't meant to name. You can choose what we tell the board, she said. Or I can hand everything to Amira now. The words landed as leverage. Julian's shoulders tightened. He had always kept an image of himself that excluded weakness. Elena's sentence began to redraw the line between loyalty and power. She waited for his face to settle. Julian folded his hands and looked at the portfolio like it was a foreign object. Elena, he said, naming her as if she were an island to be acknowledged. If this goes public, we lose 1/4 of our market value. People will question judgment. People will question me. His voice made the stakes concrete. What do you want? Clara's voice came over a terse call on Julian's phone. Julian, the board has questions. Amira is here. We need classification and a statement. The interruption carried the outside pressure back into the room. Elena felt the board's demand like a second set of hands on her shoulders. She thought of the locket. She thought of the night he had slid down the glass and whispered a name. She thought of the USP she had picked up, still warm with fingerprints. She thought of the company and of the people whose jobs could be lost if a blunt, messy disclosure happened. She thought of Clara's posture, practical, unromantic, and unforgiving about stewardship. Elena decided a measured disclosure, she said, a public narrative that admits an accounting error, names the corrective steps, and preserves the company while documenting the transfer as a covered personal obligation to be repaid. Her offer had a technical ring. It was not moral speech. It was procedure. Julian listened. He looked at Clara's name on his phone, then back at Elena, and in return, he asked. The question was precise. Elena felt the final turn coming that would change her place in the company. Her previous nights of unseen labor had primed her to ask for recognition rather than money, formal acknowledgement in writing. She answered. A title that reflects my role in protecting the company and oversight access to finance for the next fiscal year. She gave no speech about invisible work. She gave a clear ask. Julian closed his eyes briefly and opened them. You want a title? His mouth made a small, ironic line. You want to be seen on paper. To the board, he paused. Name it. The board entered the room in the next minute, with Clara at the head and Amira a step behind. The external event of return escalated the stakes into public decision. Clara's first sentence cut into the moment. We will not have the company look like chaos, she said. Julian, Elena, present me the facts in front of council. Her voice calibrated the process. Facts first, narrative second. The board sat, and the projector hummed as lights dimmed to the meeting setting. Elena felt the shift from private bargaining into public negotiation. Standing at the projector, Elena placed the memo slide up and then opened the letter without theatrics. She read aloud, line by plain line, the phrases that admitted a covered debt and a personal plea. Julian watched the words like someone watching their own signature. Clara interjected 3 times with pointed questions about dates and ledger entries. Amira wrote notes, silent, careful. The room became an exchange. Elena kept data and process. Clara pushed for accountability. Julian sought a path that preserved legacy. Their dialogue moved in short, clipped lines. Elena, why did you not bring this sooner? Clara demanded. The night audit flagged discrepancies and I traced the origin to a private account, Elena replied. I brought the corrected folder now when the meeting was already called for merged figures. She did not apologize. Julian, did you authorize these transfers? Amira, no, Julian, I signed for a loan personally. I did not intend to conceal. I intended to solve a shortfall related to a private venture. His voice was spare. A fast, charged exchange followed. Clara for the chain of custody. Amira demanded the audit trail be handed to an external forensic. Julian pressed for a controlled response. Elena interjected with procedural conditions. The argument ran 6 rapid lines where names kept appearing and the room's rhythm accelerated. Clara, we need measured disclosure. Julian, measured disclosure means the truth on the record. Clara replied. Amira, a forensic review is reasonable. Elena, then we commission it. Amira answered. And Elena, you will supervise the reconciliation. Clara, yes, Elena answered. That sequence resolved an immediate clash but left a sharper pivot. Elena had used evidence to force admission and to secure recognition. The decision was a negotiated compromise. The climax had been the confrontation in the boardroom and Elena's deliberate choice to trade discretion for formal standing. After the votes, the room smelled faintly of coffee and heated paper. Julian stepped out onto the terrace for air. Elena collected her portfolio and the locket, which she had kept in her handbag. Clara watched her for a long moment and then asked, Elena, do you understand the load of what you will carry now? Elena met Clara's gaze and answered with a practical detail instead of a speech. I will sign the oversight agreement by noon. I will prepare the corrective filings. I will notify the night audit team to preserve logs. She listed actions, not feelings. Clara nodded once, approving the competent terms that mattered. A mini cliffhanger occurred when Elena opened the portfolio to photocopy the memo for counsel and found an extra page she had not seen in Julian's drawer. It was a short ledger note with a different account name, an account connected to a shell entity. She paused. The page suggested a wider network of moves than the letter disclosed. Her hands tightened on the paper. The discovery shifted the immediate story. The problem might be deeper. She closed the portfolio and did not announce the page. She chose silence as a tactical action. Julian returned and saw her still standing. "You kept the locket," he said. The observation was small, almost personal. Elena set the locket back in her palm and let its weight tell its story. "I need you to be measured with the narrative," he added. "This is not only about me. It is about the market." He used measure as a moral argument. They walked back into the boardroom together. The board finished their procedural votes and the council drafted a short public statement that evening. The statement would read: the company identified accounting inconsistencies and initiated immediate corrective action with external oversight. It would not name the personal transfer. That language preserved value and constructed a controlled truth. Dawn came pale and thin through the blinds. Elena stood at the executive corridor and placed the locket back into the drawer where she had found it. Her fingers left the brass slightly colder than when she had picked it up. The title Clara drafted would list her as Executive Director of Corporate Oversight, a formal recognition that kept her invisible labor on record. She signed the acceptance with the same care with which she had handled evidence. Julian passed her in the lobby without fanfare. He folded an envelope, then handed her a small, sealed internal memorandum that confirmed the title and the scope she had bargained for the record. He said, "You saved the company from a messy collapse tonight, Elena." His voice was measured. His thanks was private. Elena replied with a single administrative line, "I will prepare the oversight calendar." She did not let gratitude or pain override the action. She turned the key in the drawer one last time to secure the documents and left the office building while the board convened to shape the public message. The chapter closed on a concrete beat. Elena stepped into the morning, the building doors side closed behind her, and Clara's assistant called with the first edits to the oversight agreement. The immediate conflict had been resolved through negotiation, evidence, and a relocation of formal power. The ledger page she had found remained folded in her portfolio, an unresolved detail that would shape the next chapter. Elena pushed the study door with a hand that smelled faintly of green tea and printer toner and found Marcus half turned over a laptop, collar askew, eyes on a single line of numbers. Suspicion landed in her chest like a key in a lock. She saw the transfer amount and the routing trail before anyone could explain. "Marcus." Elena, voice even, and the word stopped him mid-move. He slammed the lid as if closing a wound. "It wasn't supposed to be visible," he said. Elena took the laptop from him and set it on the desk, keeping her hands steady. The screen blinked back into life with the payment trace she had intercepted. The transfer route read like a map, with a white line through a foundation name she did not recognize at first glance. Elena had not come to the penthouse for this. She had been bringing back a corrected folder of quarterly reconciliations Julian had left open. That same corrected folder she had slammed onto the glass table weeks earlier when numbers landed like accusations. That memory sat in her hands as she scrolled. A flag transfer, a shell routing, and a small trust name she had seen once before in a charity roster. Suspicion compelled her to act. She felt it as a tightening in the base of her throat and a quick organizing of steps. Copy logs, trace users, confront Marcus. The files were concrete. The risk was concrete. She did not need permission to follow the trail. Marcus swallowed and rubbed his wrist. "We flagged it at 23:42 last night," he said. It was timed and then cleared by someone with board clearance. He avoided her eyes. Elena watched his fingers drum the wooden edge of Julian's desk. Doubt shifted into a low, practical anger. "Elena's jaw set and her voice narrowed. Whose credentials were used?" she asked. The question was a lever. Marcus froze and then named an authentication token that traced to a machine registered in the executive wing. Elena repeated the name aloud and felt the room tilt toward consequence. She moved faster than Marcus expected. Her hands found the server log on the laptop, copied it to a secure drive, and slid the drive into the inner pocket of her portfolio. She had picked up one similar device months ago when Julian had slid down the glass in the corridor and a USP had fallen from his grip. That earlier night had left her with a sense that small things mattered. Now that same habit of collecting small, inconvenient artifacts became a method. Elena kept her voice low. Lock this down. No outgoing pings. No one leaves the floor without clearance, she ordered. Marcus reached for his phone. No calls, Marcus. Not to the board. Not yet. I need the trace intact. She watched him go, watched the door click closed behind him, and felt suspicion deepen into calculation. By morning the headquarters smelled of coffee and paper. Clara arrived with her coat folded over one arm and a leather-bound agenda under her gaze. She Elena's name once and then set the agenda on the table as if testing the paper for a seam. Explain this, Elena. Clara without preface. Her tone was measured. Her eyes scanned the sheet as if weighing the ink. Elena laid out the log entries, the transfer amount, the shell routing. She spoke in precise, short sentences, dates, times, authentication tokens, server names. Clara read each line and folded her hands. Her expression cracked in a single, very small motion when Elena the Foundation's name. Clara's presence changed the air. Board pressure sharpened into an immediate, visible force. This is not merely a mistake, Clara. A misrouted payment would be negligence. This looks directed. Elena watched Julian across the corridor. He stood with his handkerchief folded and his face composed, but she could see his fingers whiten around a pen. Suspicion shifted into alarm. Elena felt her mouth dry. She took the corrected folder from her bag and placed it on the table to underline the ledger entries that did not match the transfer lines. These numbers were altered last quarter, she said. I corrected them. Someone rotated money after the books closed. Julian did not speak at first. He read with the slow care of a man measuring damage who signed clearance. He asked finally. His voice stayed contained, but the syllables were clipped. Elena met his gaze and said the authentication token again. Marcus' face registered a color change when she spoke the device name. It traces to an executive workstation, Elena. It rotates through a shell tied to a foundation listed under Clara's oversight. Clara's lip tightened. That foundation is meant for legacy grants, she said. She glanced at Julian and then at Elena. Her hands were steady on the agenda. If the foundation was used in this routing, it was intended to shield the destination. There are protocols. Who saw the routing? Who authorized the move? Elena could hear other board members shifting. She felt the room press in. The tension rose in measured beats. Boards open, phones slide, coats make small noises against chair backs. Elena arranged a private meeting with Julian that afternoon in his study. She put the copied server logs on the desk and watched him read. He held the paper in both hands, eyes tracing the lines the way a man might trace a crack in a marble floor. When he reached the line that named the dormant trust connected to his family's estate, his shoulders tightened and then sagged slightly. The controlled facade she had seen before fractured by inches. Elena observed that fracture as one would observe a piece of machinery beginning to bind. She nothing for 3 heartbeats, and then pointed to the ledger entry that linked the dormant trust to the shell company. This was used as an intermediary, Elena. It rerouted funds to accounts that don't appear on our books. Julian looked at her. Clara oversees several foundations, he said. The words arrived clipped and factual. He did not add accusation. Elena watched his jaw move. She could see doubt in the way he tucked and retucked the handkerchief in his pocket. Suspicion displaced into a tight, controlled need for clarity. Then bring Clara into this audit, he said. Call a meeting. Now, Elena agreed and left with the logs in her portfolio and a new weight at the base of her ribs. The secure archives room smelled of paper glue and the kind of cold that hangs on steel shelves. Elena and Julian worked over the server traces while Marcus sat at a terminal and pulled old memos. The logs showed routing headers that repeated patterns. The shell company's registration matched an address that resolved to a mailbox used by several foundations. When Elena referenced on a list, she found the dormant trust's name on a grant ledger maintained under Clara's agenda. The link was not circumstantial, it was a path drawn in numbers and addresses. Elena felt a shift she could only name by action. She stood and walked to the shelf, pulled down a file, and shoved it toward Julian. Clara entered the emergency boardroom as if attending a routine meeting, but she found the air already charged. Elena presented the evidence step by short, clear step. Server logs, authentication tokens, transfer timestamps, and the shell routing that ended in accounts managed by the Foundation. She spoke plainly and used names frequently to keep the room anchored. Marcus, run the chain again, Marcus, said Clara. Explain how this passed oversight. Marcus answered. Voice hurried. He gave dates and device names and, under pressure, named a series of approvals that included a board-level token. Conversation became a grid of short exchanges. The required rapid back and forth in the argument came naturally. Who signed? We traced it to a token registered to the executive wing. Which executive? The token rolled through a machine registered to Clara's office. Elena watched Clara's face when the name hit the air. Clara did not deny the mechanics. She tilted her head and took papers in hand as if inspecting a page for a seam. Then she looked at Julian in a way that measured both the man and the consequences of accusation. There are grants that require discretion. Clara. Her voice had a cold clarity. If funds move to protect sensitive initiatives, we must ask whether the board's mandate was served. Julian snapped back, voice low and sharp. This was not disclosed. This was not coordinated with me. 3 rapid exchanges followed between Julian and Clara, each sentence short and clipped. Elena interjected with specific timestamps and a name of the shell company. The room fell into a hush when Marcus projected the transfer route on the screen, and it lit Clara's Foundation name in stark type. The boardroom burst outward into confrontation. An older director demanded safeguards, another about legal exposure. Elena felt the emotional shift again. Alarm moved into accusation. She kept her voice tight and factual. This is a deliberate rerouting, she said. It used authority tokens to clear a transfer after books closed. That is intentional action, not error. Voices rose in short lines, meeting line for line. Clara finally set down her pen and met Elena's eyes. Elena, she said, naming her carefully, what proof ties the Foundation to the final accounts? Elena slid a printout across the table that showed the account endpoint and the bank correspondence headers. These are the bank confirmations, Elena. They show the deposit path into accounts linked to Clara's Foundation operations. Clara's face changed, but not in the way others expected. She was not flustered. She was precise. She for one more document and left the room to retrieve a closed ledger from her office. In the corridor outside the boardroom, Elena watched Clara move with the poised gait of someone used to the weight of decisions. Clara returned and set the ledger on the table. Her handwriting appeared in an internal note, initialed, that referenced the shell company account as part of a restricted disbursement list. It was a small line of script that, when connected with the server logs, changed the frame of the event. The room reacted. Shock became a rearrangement of facts. Elena felt clarity bloom in her thinking, and then quickly shifted to a new emotion. Betrayal. She had expected the breach to be an external fraud or a junior error. Instead, it mapped to a deliberate choice made within the circle of trust. She kept her movements deliberate, slide another printout, point to the ledger entry, read the initials aloud. Julian. Clara directly, did you authorize this routing? Clara did not answer immediately. Instead, she closed the ledger and met Julian with a look that held both accountability and a test. I authorized certain disbursements in the trust's name, she said. If those disbursements were used outside the intended recipients, I will explain. But I will not sacrifice the company's stability to a public spectacle. That line landed like a selective truce. Julian's face tightened and then smoothed into a mask of command. The room divided into those who wanted public exposure and those who wanted containment. Elena listened to the choices being weighed, law, reputation, shareholder reaction, and realized that the board might prefer control over truth. Her suspicion evolved into a strategic calculation. If the company shielded Clara, the funds would be rerouted again and the story would vanish from public view. If the board exposed the action, the company would weather a scandal. Elena measured the consequences not as abstractions but as steps. An audit, press releases, legal action, board realignment. She felt a surge of purpose and tiredness at once. Outside the meeting, Clara for a private word, Elena followed into a narrow corridor lit by a single lamp. Clara closed the door with the practiced motion of a woman who guarded her privacy. Elena, Clara, you are competent. You see traces that others miss. You can break this open, and it will break us all. There is a cost to disclosure. Elena kept her posture composed, fingers folded on the portfolio. I want stability, Elena. I also want accuracy. People moved money with intention. That matters. Clara watched her for a long moment. Then she offered a conditional truce. A public acknowledgement for Elena that would be modest, a formal note in Julian's announcements. And in return Elena would keep the fuller truth confidential so the company could handle the fallout without destabilizing investors. Elena considered the bargain. In the pause she thought of the small engraved locket hidden in her bag, a token she never wore, kept folded into paper like a folded note. It was personal and irrelevant to ledgers, but it represented a decision she had once promised herself, to preserve dignity while keeping truth within reach. The ledger had forced her into a choice about leverage. Clara's offer shifted the stakes from ledger lines to personal dignity. Elena's reactions were physical. A tightening of her throat, a slow inhale, a steadying of hands. She a question that forced clarity. What exactly would your public acknowledgement say? Clara outlined a phrase and a placement. A line in the annual report recognizing Elena's contribution to internal controls, a departmental commendation. It would not mention the redirection or the foundation's role. Elena felt two emotion shifts in quick sequence. Betrayal had become calculated restraint. Suspicion became cautious negotiation. She for one additional assurance. A written record that the fuller audit would proceed privately, with external counsel overseeing the trace endpoints. Clara hesitated and then nodded once. I can agree to that, Elena, she said. We will keep the company intact and we will investigate quietly. You will receive the formal acknowledgement you seek. But we will not allow public destabilization. That night Elena walked back to her desk in the executive wing. The office lights were low. She sat at her workspace and opened the inner pocket of her portfolio. The small engraved locket fit in her palm like a secret. She placed the copied server logs beside it and read the lines once more. The ledger had shifted power inside the company in a way no press release could show. Elena had earned a limited acknowledgement and kept a larger truth as leverage. The decision was not clean or heroic. It was workmanlike and precise. She closed the laptop and slid the locket inside, fingers steady. At dawn she made the formal note to Julian and to the board, accepting the modest public wording and asking for the private audit to begin immediately. Her message was short and precise. She walked to the window and watched the first light hit the glass building across the courtyard. The city moved in small, indifferent motions, deliveries, cleaners, people taking steps. Elena felt the day's decisions settle into muscle memory. She tucked the portfolio under her arm, made sure the drive with the logs remained unreachable, and left her desk with a closed posture. Clara's conditional truce would hold for now. Julian's legacy had a new seam. Elena had a new, quiet leverage. When she reached the service elevator, Marcus was waiting with a stack of security summaries and a look that betrayed exhaustion. We quarantined the nodes, he said. We logged every access. The traces are intact. Elena nodded and said his name. Good work, Marcus. Keep the chain clean. He offered a brief, grateful smile and walked away. Elena felt the small relief of competence confirmed. She stepped into sunlight and the city noise folded around her like a new, practical rhythm. Before she left for the day, Elena placed the small engraved locket into the inner pocket of her portfolio and shut it with a gentle, final motion. The locket was not a trophy. It was a reminder of the choice she had made in the corridor and in the boardroom. The ledger had not produced a dramatic resignation or a public firing. It had produced an exchange, a modest recognition in public and guarded truth in private. That exchange altered the company's internal map, and Elena knew the change would ripple in quiet ways. She closed the portfolio and walked toward the elevator, steps measured, decisions in her hands. The day had given her leverage and a recognition that would be visible on paper. The night had given her the knowledge that the company's hidden alliances were not unchallengeable. As the elevator doors closed, she felt the decision close with them, the locket warm against her ribs and the ledger S-trace saved inside her portfolio. Elena stepped onto the penthouse terrace and slammed the corrected ledger against the glass railing, while Julian looked up from the city below. Suspicion tightened her grip on the folder and ordered her voice before she could think. "Julian, explain this transfer." The night hummed with distant traffic. The ledger landed like an accusation between them. Julian's mouth tightened. He did not lower himself to the ledger's level. He was used to commands answered without sound, but Elena's hand did not shake. She had come with facts. She had come with numbers and a sequence of dates. She had traced through 3 accounting programs and 1 hidden spreadsheet. Within minutes, the terrace had stopped feeling private. Elena's chest tasted of green tea and printer toner. She kept her wrists visible, the way she always did when she wanted to show she held nothing to hide. Suspicion was the engine behind each step she had taken since she found the US 2 nights ago and saw the routing trail that did not match company accounts. That suspicion pushed her across the threshold and into confrontation. Julian walked toward her without running. His suit caught the amber rim light. His face was an even plane, but his fingers folded and refolded a handkerchief. "Elena, Julian, what are you doing on my terrace at 1 in the morning?" His voice was low and even. There was a metal edge beneath the controlled tone. Elena kept the ledger between them like a shield. "You know what this is?" she said. 45,000 transferred to an unknown account on the 23rd. The ledger here corrects the entry and matches Marcus' workstation timestamp. Elena's sentences were precise and short. She Marcus's name and left the room for something to happen. Julian's jaw moved. "Marcus?" he asked. "Marcus Turner." He did not ask because he had forgotten Marcus. He asked to test the sound of the accusation. Elena nodded once. Her throat was dry. Doubt arrived as a second shape, doubt about motive, doubt about whether exposing this would protect the company or hand Julian a public humiliation he might fight to hide. She covered that hesitation with another fact. Marcus' laptop shows the remote access from an internal mask account. The routing hides behind an employee shell, but the signature on the transfer uses a private locket serial number. Elena stopped because the terrace door opened and light fell across the ledger. She had the locket in her palm. Its engraving was small and older than any secure seal should have been. Julian stepped closer, and for a moment his control thinned into visible fragility. "Show me." The word was not a concession, it was a demand. Elena turned the locket in her fingers and let the night air carry the small metallic sound. That sound was a discovery. It was also a challenge. The roof door opened wider. The scent of cigar smoke and bergamot filled the doorway before Clara Voss stepped onto the terrace. She took in the ledger, the locket, and the 2 figures. "You could to keep this to paper, Elena." Clara, voice flat, calculating. "Why bring it up here, with the city listening?" Elena did not step back. She felt a shift. Suspicion had become resolve. She handed the ledger to Clara with the same even cadence she used at the photocopier when a mistake would ruin a meeting. "Because this is not a personal error. This is a pattern. Marcus' transfer is one of several. We need immediate review." Clara's gaze slid to Julian. She measured him with her practiced tilt of head and did not hide the practical consideration in her eyes. "Julian, explain this." The line landed like an order you could not dodge. The roof's plants rustled from the late breeze. The city lights below were a grid of indifferent witnesses. Julian Steele, grey eyes met Clara's hazel ones for the briefest moment. "There are complications," he said, "personal complications. This can be handled privately." His fingers tightened around the briefcase strap at his shoulder. Elena watched his hand. The small scar above his lip caught the light when he grimaced. That stoic face had eroded before, in a private corridor 2 nights ago, When he whispered a name, he would not let anyone hear. Elena had seen him then, sliding down a glass pane and muttering like a man who had been cut. She remembered the USP she had stooped to pick up and the tremor in his voice. Private. Clara repeated, and her words narrowed. This is corporate risk now. Elena, show your evidence. Her agenda did not hide that she prioritized the company's stability. Clara stepped forward and took the ledger with clinical fingers. Tell me where you traced it. Tell me dates, account numbers, and names. Elena read. She kept sentences short. 23rd 40, 5,000, masked account labeled M. Turner on internal logs at 9:01 p.m. on the 25th. A similar mask cleared a contractor payment. The locketed matches an old family serial kept on a personal file Julian closed last year. She Julian's name deliberately. The pause afterward made the terrace smaller. Julian's mouth opened. Lockett. He blinked. The fragility returned like a visible crack, which Lockett, his voice asked. He was good at taking back control with questions. Elena stepped in to remove that space. She held up the small engraved locket. The crescent dent in its edge caught the light. She had found it tucked inside a manila folder in Marcus's desk last night, amid transfer logs and meeting minutes. Clara inspected the locket. Her reading glasses perched at the tip of her nose. That engraving corresponds to an outside trust, she said, not an internal account. Clara's voice now had interest, not hostility. Who placed it? Elena. She tested for accuracy. A new sound cracked across the terrace. A phone vibrated in Julian's suit jacket. He ignored it. Elena felt a pressure she hadn't expected, anger that rose not from personal insult, but from the way whispered protection had almost replaced institutional accountability. Elena's hands trembled briefly, and that tremor was an emotion shift. Resolve swelled into anger when Julian tried to bury the ledger under a private explanation. Julian stepped forward. He lowered his voice. Elena, you must understand. His words were the mask of command. This is messy. For the company, for my family. Drop this, and I will make sure Marcus' mistake never reaches the board. His offer was a mixture of threat and concession. He had the control of someone used to exchange, silence for stability. Elena heard the threat. She also heard the concession. She pictured the boardroom where Clara and Julian had made decisions that guided 1,000 people's paychecks and pensions. She thought of Marcus at the laptop, half-turned, collar-askew, eyes fixed on a single line of numbers in Chapter 3. She thought of the corrected folder she slammed on the glass table in that midnight audit when 3 sets of eyes watched numbers land like accusation. Those were concrete memories she used as evidence. Elena did not let Julian reframe them as private pain. No, Elena. The word was short. No, Julian. This is corporate. If Marcus made a mistake, we investigate. If someone used his shell, we expose the trace. She put her name behind the action. If you prefer to shield it, I'll take it to Clara and the board. Julian's face shifted. He was not only controlling an empire, he was protecting an image that secured his legacy. That image was a public thing with private vulnerabilities. Elena had seen those vulnerabilities before, small cracks in his composure when a private failure threatened the company. She had watched him freeze with a pen in his knuckles during the midnight audit, his knuckles white against a glass table. She had seen him slide down a pane and whisper a name she would not repeat. Clara folded the ledger, then looked at Elena. You brought proof to the roof, and you brought a locket. Why? Clara's words were clipped. Do you seek to protect or to punish? Elena answered not with a declarative speech, but with specifics. I want the company protected. I want the peril reconciled. I want Marcus cleared if he is innocent. I want the person who hid behind his account held accountable. I want the record corrected so this can't recur. She Marcus' name again. Marcus' workstation shows a remote token at 20:240. 5 that didn't belong to him. The token logs tie back to a server that had access only through a sealed trust account. Elena watched Clara's face as she named the pieces. Clara and Julian exchanged a long look. Clara's posture shifted into assessment. She read the ledger, then the locket, then the city through the glass. Her voice narrowed. Call a meeting. Bring Marcus. Bring whoever else you have on file. We will convene at dawn. I will call the board in an emergency session. If this is as you say, Elena, then we treat it as a formal deposition. Her words changed the game. What Elena held was no longer a private lever, it was a public instrument. Julian's lip tightened, an emergency board meeting at dawn. He stepped between Clara and the terrace door. For a moment he tried to reclaim private control. Clara, I will not have the company's reputation burned over an internal file without context. His voice rose a measure. That rise pulled anger into the air, a distinct shift in how Elena perceived him. From brittle command to defensive man trying to herd consequences. Clara turned toward him with the coolness she wore like a wrap. Reputation managed by concealment is not reputation. It is risk. Either you let the board handle it, or this becomes public with more damage. Choose. She spoke with the authority of someone who saw power as stewardship. That was her character. Pragmatic, shrewd, cultured. Elena watched Julian consider the choice. She saw him weigh private damage against public collapse. The new morning arrived like a decision. Elena left the terrace at Clara's instruction and gathered Marcus, who arrived with a laptop bag and a face that read both startled and embarrassed. Marcus had been a presence in earlier nights, half turned over a laptop, discovering a transfer string that did not fit his usual workflow. Elena met him in the corridor. She kept sentences short. Marcus, sit with me in the small conference room. We go over your logs. Bring your laptop. Marcus nodded and followed. Inside the small room, Elena watched him place his laptop on the table and tap the trackpad until the transfer logs were visible. He kept his collar straight. His hands were steady when explaining technical sequences. His voice was different from Julian's and Clara's. Younger, a bit hurried. I didn't initiate that transfer. Marcus, the session it isn't mine. I logged out at 9. The token appears after my session closed. The technical details plainly. Elena questions in short bursts. Who had the token access? Who else used your machine? Marcus answered with timestamps and a list of internal service accounts. He named accounts and schedule windows. Elena took notes in precise strokes. Doubt arrived again, this time about motive. Who would funnel money through a company shell and why? Elena's mind moved from suspicion to a sharper question. Personal motive or institutional theft? When they walked back toward the executive suite, Clara intercepted them at the elevator. We meet in 30 minutes. Clara, emergency boardroom. Bring your evidence, Elena. Marcus, bring your laptop and stay. Julian will be there. Do not leave the building. The boardroom felt like a stage. The glossy table reflected the city. Early morning light cut across the glass. Board members arrived quickly. People Elena knew by sight and by how their hands held agendas. Clara took her seat at the head like a conductor. Julian stood for a moment, then sat opposite Elena, his posture deliberate. Elena placed the ledger, the printed token traces, and the small engraved locket on the table, where everyone could see them. Clara opened the session. We convened to address the anomalous transfers discovered within our internal accounts. Elena Park will present her findings. Clara's voice carried. It required precise answers. Elena began with numbers, dates, and the traces Marcus had shown her. She read the transfers aloud, short lines that left no room for mishearing. 45,000 on the 23rd. Masked account appears as M. Turner at 9:01 p.m. Contractor payment cleared on the 25th from a similar masked profile. Token logs show a server access path tied to trust serial ZU9734, which matches an engraved locket found in Marcus' desk. Elena did not editorialize. She let the ledger speak. She let Clara's authority frame the process. The room waited. Julian leaned forward. These are allegations, he said. We will need corroboration. Elena, how confident are you in the chain? He named her to the room, not with accusation, but with the procedural requirement of proof. Elena replied with the precise language of numbers. I traced the token through the internal firewall logs, cross-referenced the timestamps with Marcus' workstation, and pulled the contractor agreements that matched the routing numbers. The token serial is a physical match to this locket's engraving. She slid the locket across the table so the light caught the dent near the crescent. A murmur ran around the boardroom. A junior counsel raised a hand and asked for server-level logs. Elena had them printed. She handed them to the counsel and watched as the paper moved through hands like a witness being examined. The room broke into procedural questions. Each question pulled on a thread that could unravel the story into public evidence. Then Clara spoke a line that served as a turning point: if these links check out, then the company faces either a grave internal betrayal or a highly orchestrated attempt to hide transfers through an employee shell. Either way, we cannot let the CEO unilaterally conceal this. We will conduct a formal deposition now. Clara's voice closed the door on private negotiation. Her decision reframed Elena's act as stewardship rather than betrayal. Julian's control frayed. He met Clara's gaze and then Elena's. "You convened this on what authority?" he asked. "This is my company to protect." His tone attempted to reclaim hierarchy. The room tightened. Clara answered with facts: on the authority of the board's fiduciary duty, on the authority of the risk this presents. We either restructure the oversight now or risk exposing the company to regulators. She named the stakes plainly and left little room for dissent. Julian growled a low sound and then sat quieter, his handkerchief folding accelerated for a few breaths. The counsel called the server team and verified the logs. The data matched Elena's tracing. The token path led through a trust account with personal serials once associated with Julian's private family trust. The trace showed a routing that separated the final beneficiary into a shadow contractor account. The room listened to technical facts, not speculation. Julian rose then, and the boardroom's atmosphere shifted toward its climax. His voice, usually low and measured, had a quick edge. "If you publish this without understanding the context, you will do more damage than good. There are private arrangements I must protect. There are legal partners who—" He stopped because Clara interrupted. "We are not publishing yet. Clara, we are documenting and taking an immediate pause for governance. Julian, you may explain under oath. Elena will present the formal deposition. This is not personal. It is corporate procedure." The word, deposition, hung in the room like an instrument being tuned for a decisive note. Julian's face hardened. "Then let it be done." He turned to Elena. "If you proceed, know this. There will be fallout. You will change more than one career. Are you prepared?" He placed responsibility back on her. His posture suggested he hoped fear or guilt might cause her to fold. This was the mid-chapter cliffhanger. Elena felt the full weight of the choice. Her pulse was steady in her throat. She had rehearsed this path, but the reality of forcing a CEO into formal reckoning was different than tracing numbers. She saw the ledger on the table. She saw Marcus' nervous hand tapping a laptop. She heard Clara's quiet authority. The board was a crossroads. One decision could protect the institution or send Julian into a defensive collapse that would ripple through employees and markets. Elena's response was not a speech but action. She handed the ledger and copies of server logs to the council and to each board member. "Proceed," she said. "I will deliver the full deposition. Marcus will join. We will run the forensic audit now." The morning became a blur of sworn statements, legal procedure, and urgent calls. The council swore in witnesses. Marcus provided his logs. Julian sat through his deposition with a composure that fractured in small, human ways. A glance away, a thumb rubbed at a scab on his lip, a pause that lasted too long when asked about transfers. Elena watched and catalogued these reactions as evidence and as learning. Control could fracture into visible signs when the stakes were personal. At one point in the deposition, a new piece of evidence surfaced. The council had pulled phone records that showed a single external call to an offshore intermediary on the 22nd, the day before the first transfer. The number's metadata tied back to a shell company whose incorporator name matched a trustee Julian had mentioned in a private meeting months earlier. The room reacted to that connection. Gasps were minimal. The law kept them small, yet Clara's eyes sharpened into something like intent. Julian's voice broke on one question: "Who arranged the trust?" Counsel asked. He paused. "My father arranged certain trusts." "There are family matters, Julian, that does not excuse any corporate impropriety, but there is context." He avoided naming the trustee. Elena watched him avoid specifics. She recorded it as part of the pattern of concealment. Clara then did something Elena had not expected. She stood and addressed the council directly. We will not play political games with company governance. If there is a family trust that used our channels improperly, we must restructure oversight and impose account. Level checks that prevent private instruments from using corporate rails. Clara's proposal reframed the conflict away from revenge and toward institutional correction. That shift moved the emotional landscape. Elena felt a change from anger to cautious relief. The deposition concluded with the board voting to open an internal forensic audit, to suspend any single actor payment approval rights, and to install temporary external oversight until the audit concluded. Julian had to concede certain controls he had held exclusively. The concession was not theatrical, it was formal. He signed the board's temporary measures with a crisp motion of the pen, and left the room with a face that had regained some of its practiced composure, but bore the recent strain in shallow lines near his eyes. Afterwards, Clara to speak with Elena alone in Julian's office. The office smelled like cedar and bergamot. The blinds threw parallel slats across the carpet. Clara did not offer comfort. She measured Elena instead. You did the right thing, she said simply. You protected the company. You exposed a risk. But you should know. Loyalty that moves the organization will be tested. Will you accept a formal role in ensuring these protections? Will you be willing to put your name to the processes you demand? Elena thought of the ledger, of the USP she had stooped to pick up, of the corrected financial folder she slammed onto the glass table, and of Marcus at his laptop. Those concrete events had guided her from suspicion to action. She felt an emotion shift again. From cautious relief into a steady determination that was practical rather than rhetorical. Yes, she said, if it means formal recognition for the work and safeguards for those who keep the company honest, I will help write the oversight. I will accept a formal role. Her voice was even. She did not rise into speeches. She named her terms simply. Institutional accountability, protections for whistleblowers, and a clear chain of custody for sensitive tokens. Clara nodded once. We will draft a memorandum. It will carry your name. It will carry responsibilities. It will shift private leverage into governed process. She was offering Elena not only recognition, but a transformation of invisible labor into formal duty. Elena felt the line between being indispensable and being acknowledged tighten into a new pathway. Julian returned later that evening. The penthouse light was softer. Dusk had receded. He did not apologize. He placed a folder on the desk and said, "You changed how this will be handled. You made a choice that will reach beyond any single ledger. I will not pretend I like it, Elena, but I see the necessity. Enter your proposals with precision. I will review them." His voice had regained measure. His gaze, when it landed on her face, was less guarded than before. He acknowledged responsibility in the smallest of ways by deferring to process. Elena accepted the small concession without dramatics. She placed the engraved locket inside a slim leather portfolio and touched the small dent near the crescent. The locket had been a personal token left inside official paperwork. It had served as both clue and catalyst. She had considered keeping it as silent leverage. Instead, she had used it to produce formal change. Clara's conditional alliance reframed Elena's act as stewardship. Marcus resumed his duties under temporary supervision, but with an official offer of council support to clear his name. The board ordered an external audit and published a controlled statement about governance changes the next week. The company did not explode into headlines. The measures were surgical and contained. Days later, an internal memo arrived in Elena's inbox with a subject line she had not expected. New controls and responsibilities, Elena Park. She opened it at her modest kitchen table at dawn. The room smelled faintly of green tea. The memo outlined a role to formalize oversight of sensitive transfers, protections for administrative staff who handled confidential materials, and a process for chain of custody documentation for tokens and physical items. It also listed a starting date and a modest increase in title that recognized her invisible labor. She placed the engraved locket into a small drawer in her kitchen and closed it with a careful hand. The drawer clicked shut. She folded the memo and read the line listing her new responsibilities a second time. The shift in power had not been shattering. It was procedural and quiet. It acknowledged work that had kept the company running beneath public view. Elena brewed her first cup of the morning and set it on the counter. She thought of Clara's voice and Julian's concession. She thought of Marcus and of the ledger she had carried across the terrace. She thought of the usp she had stooped to pick up in a corridor with humming lights. That memory no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a trigger that had started a formal correction. She folded the memo and placed it beside the locket. On the table the items were small and precise. A piece of metal with an old engraving, a printed page with governance language, and a mug that steamed in the early light. The city woke in the window beyond. The final line of the memo required a signature. Elena uncapped a pen and, without fanfare, signed the acceptance at the bottom. She slid the paper into an envelope, sealed it, and set it on the counter where sunlight would reach it later. Then she opened the drawer, placed the engraved locket inside, and closed it. The drawer clicked again, and the sound was the chapter's last definite movement. At dawn she stood by her window with the freshly printed memo bearing her name, and the world outside continued its business. The ledger that had begun as a confrontation had become a new set of rules. Elena folded the memo and placed it into her bag. She left her apartment with the small gold watch on her wrist, the portfolio under her arm, and a quiet, concrete task. Formalized protections so invisible labor would no longer be invisible. The morning elevator closed behind her as she left for the office. The door sealed with a soft, resolute click.